the other. So I think it's just great networking as well.
I think
Right.
we're live, but
Yeah. I think we can start in a minute.
I don't like. We need to wait for a while. Like Mr. Ranjan is
Okay.
yet still not here, so
Okay. Can
yeah,
okay.
let's wait for one
Yeah.
minute and then we can start.
Cool. No worries.
Let me just give him.
Da, da, da.
He's still not here.
We will just start in a minute. Just waiting for those on to end. And
Okay.
right. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our audiences all over the world. I am Rafid Nabi. I'm a global advisor at Mazeltov. And at the same time, I'm working as a senior associate at Charnovel and Associates and as a part-time lecturer at London College of Legal Studies South. We are proud to present the first of the Mazeltov Startup webinar, and the webinar for this session is called a South Asian Discourse on Entrepreneurship Law and Policy, where we'll be focusing and doing a comparative analysis of the startup ecosystem and the problems and policy issues surrounding it in Bangladesh and in Nepal. I have with me my co-moderator and fellow global advisor from Nepal, Manasbi.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today. I am Manasvi Podal, co-founder at ASVI Group, a business consulting firm in Nepal, and also I am a part-time lecturer at SIU Secondary School. Along with it, I am the global advisor at Mazeltov since February this year, and yeah, looking forward to have you all having a fruitful discussion today. Opportunity to start.
Great. Thank you. We have an eminent names of panelists in the webinar today, and I would just like to introduce them. First of all, we have with us Mr. Faisal Islam from Bangladesh. He is a passionate entrepreneur who aims to have a positive impact on people's lives. He has co-founded SafeWill, an affordable emergency medical service provider in rural Bangladesh. His envisions bringing in is affordable healthcare to every rural doorstep. Faisal Islam was also recognized as the Commonwealth Young Person of the Year 2021 for his work at SafeWill. We also have Mr. Rifat Rahman from Bangladesh. Rifat Rahman is a barrister at law who was called to the bar of England and Wales by the Honourable Society of Lincoln's Inn. Soon after qualifying as a barrister, he joined at Mahbub and Company, a full-service law firm, as an associate in September 2017. Mr. Rahman's dynamic career ranges from his specializations in corporate affairs, mergers and acquisition, financial and securities law, financial compliance, foreign investment, corporate and commercial litigation matters, arbitration, etc. He's also an associate arbitrator of ADR ODR International. He also works as a lecturer at the undergraduate program of London College of Legal Studies South. Rifat is also an elected Bar Council Representation Committee member of the Honourable Society of Lincoln's Inn and is a member of the Junior Members Committee and Social Mobility Subcommittee of the Inn. This he is not the only lawyer in the panel today. We also have with us Mr. Tanzu Muzammil from Bangladesh. Tanzu Muzammil is at present working as an associate at a leading corporate set, ASN Associates. It's a Tier 1 law firm recognized by Legal 500, Asia Law, IFLR, and Chambers and Partners. He was called as Barrister of Law from the Honorable Society of Lincoln's Inn, and he is currently enrolled as an advocate of Dhaka Judge and Session Court, Bangladesh. His specialty is regulatory assessment, legal research, providing legal opinion, drafting agreements, and handling authoring and civil cases at the district court. He has advised various startups such as MCC, Sheba XYZ, Milvik Bangladesh, Healthcare Information System Limited, known as Daktarbari, and etc. And last but not the least, from Bangladesh, we have Anisa Ali. Ms. Anisa Ali is a CFA and has more than 9 years of experience in equity and debt capital markets and has worked with different organizations in various roles. She has experience in corporate advisory, equity and debt valuation, structured finance products, and sell site fundraising as well as compliance. At present, she is Director of Investments at SBK Tech Ventures, a woman led, privately held technology focused venture capital company. The fund strategy of SBK is to drive impact investing, gender lens investing, environmental, social, and corporate governance, and investing and sustainable development goals. Manasbi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rafid. So from Nepal, we have Mr. Radip Paudel. Mr. Radip Paudel has been working as an executive director for Nepal's popular e-learning website called kulabs.com from the past 7 years. He is also involved as an IT coordinator in an NGO called Nepal Journey that works for establishing e-library in various rural parts of Nepal. Besides this, he has also worked as an IT consultant for a few schools inside Kathmandu Valley. Recently, with a group of friends, Mr. Paudel has started another edtech company called Saral Mind, where he is a co-founder. He is very passionate about education, especially technology in education. Our second panelist from Nepal is Mr. Ranjani Puel. Mr. Fuel is the founder and global CTO of Genesis Solution with over 15 years of technology experience and holds various industry standard certifications from AWS, Microsoft, Cisco, Alibaba Cloud, MongoDB, and Nagios. Genesis Solution, headquartered in the UK, has established a presence in countries like Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Australia. He is an expert in public cloud computing and information security and has experience working with the banking industry, large-scale e-commerce solutions, and enterprise IT. He is passionate to solve the human life problem by digitization and cloud technologies and founded the first cloud community in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. He is passionate about cloud technologies, DevSecOps methodology, IoT, AI, ML, and cloud security. Please welcome our panelists with a round of applause, and let's start this conversation going. So, Rafid, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Manasbi. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to attend the webinar today. It means a lot. Mazeltov as an organization has been, it's a young organization, but it believes and it promotes young voices in policy making. It wants to create a global discourse on matters that needs to be talked about. It's and the area we work with a lot of area of laws and policies. We work with matters such as freedom of speech. We work with refugee crisis. We work with protection of human rights to interesting developments such as artificial intelligence, the intellectual property law rights, and even the newest addition to our webinar series, the talk on startups. While dealing with startups, at least in Bangladesh and in general from a South Asian point of view, it's a pretty recent concept. It has seen a huge boom in Bangladesh in the recent years. But what it means that there's also a lack of policy, governance, and clear-cut rules which the startups can follow in terms of investment, in terms of compliance, and in terms of governance, which makes it difficult for it to have a long-term plan or to even sustain. Having considered this issue, while in one of the meetings of the global advisors, we have a monthly meeting, we realized that most of the startups have had an adverse impact during the pandemic. And we realized that if we talk about this, if we discuss what the issues are, and to an extent try to solve problems or at least address some of these issues, maybe at a later point of time, we can help create laws and policies which will prevent this from happening again in the near future. Based on this, first of all, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Tanzum Mozambo. Tanzum Bhai would be introducing, first of all, the laws and policies that surrounding the startup ecosystem in Bangladesh, and to the extent whether they're sufficient to protect them as they are. He will also talk about the issues facing the startups during the pandemic period, which is subsisting even till now. Tanzum Bhai, over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Rafid. First I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mazeltov for giving the opportunity to young people in policy discussion and legal discussion. I just want to be clear. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. Great. So this is an excellent opportunity for us young people to talk about policy and law. So today's discussion, we will be focusing on startup, entrepreneurship, and SMEs. Although the focus will be on startup, but we understand that the entrepreneurship activities would it does include startups, F-commerce, the gig economy workers, the SME foundation, small companies or small businesses, all of them, they are part of this culture of startups and economic activity. Bangladesh has a thriving startup and SME industry. We have over 1,000 plus active startups in Bangladesh, and we have some infrastructure and background which supports these startups and SMEs. For instance, the government has given us opportunity of high tech parks to support the IT and ITES sectors. And the idea project which allows startup to get funding, that is an excellent opportunity as well. We do have a government backed VC, the Startup Bangladesh Limited, which is currently funding some of the startup activities. So we do have a thriving startup culture, SME culture, and also we have some sort of policy and government support. But that our discussion would be today to see how far that actually fits in well. And to be honest, the Bangladeshi startups have been doing fantastic, in my opinion. Some of the startups we see, they are globally recognized. They are doing activities which is, somehow it's better than Google, for instance. I remember we were seeing one of the startups who had built a concept for, the text to audio system, which is fantastic. It was better than the Google text to audio we have. So with the culture, it's good, but the pandemic has affected a lot of these startups. In 2020 report of like Castle Partners stated that one in four startup had to close down their business, and those who are still running, they have some difficulties. The difficulties are primarily starting from funding, keeping themselves running during this time, running their business and also running for a long period of time. So funding has been the biggest issue, and we see some policy activities in that regard. I'll address in a second. And not to, and from the difficult perspectives, also I would like to mention the impact on employment. So, for instance, in Bangladesh, startup community helped to employ more than 1 million workers. And that's a big number. I'm leaving the F-commerce and uh, I'm leaving the F-commerce and the ITES sectors aside. Just the startup community employs over 1 million workers. That's a big number. And once these startups are affected, then that means these employees are affected. So we need policy measures in that regard to support these startups so that they can, get working with their employees. Now, the policy part that I would like to discuss first. So COVID had a big impact on the startup, but policy wise, in we worked on a policy report since last year from the very beginning, and policy wise, the first approach of government was cannot be much appreciated, because When the stimulus packages and government orders were given, the lockdown measures were imposed. To be honest, it's not lockdown; it's holiday measures were imposed. It was not much towards protecting the IT or the startup sector. I remember one thing that the Ministry of Commerce did give a circular which at least allowed the F-commerce and the startup workers to deliver goods. That was the least we got at the very beginning. Other than that, at the start of the discussion, pandemic measures, there was not much for the startup. For instance, there was a stimulus package of 760 crore for the informal sector. For informal sector, we basically means the rickshaw pullers, or the lower community of the country. But that informal sector didn't include it, or did not include the f-commerce or the gig economy workers. Okay, so that was one of the biggest drawbacks, I would say, to government policy or measures to help the startup. However, things has improved since then. Two things I would like to mention policy-wise that the government has done to improve the startup funding scenario, although albeit to a very a limited activity. Uh, so, for instance, the first thing I would like to mention is that post-COVID measures adopted by the ICT sector of Bangladesh is that they have this 150 crore VC fund in order to fund the activities of startup. And those who are from Bangladesh, Rifat and Rafid, you must know, even Faisal Bhai, you must know that Startup Bangladesh has recently funded some of the activity, some of the 7 startups, ongoing startups in Bangladesh. I respect their approach. Their approach was to fund ongoing businesses, the businesses who are running well, and to allow them to continue their activity for next 1 year or 2 years. So a good amount of funding was provided to these 7 startups, which would include one of the portfolio that we work for, Shape. So they also received for the running businesses, uh, including startups like Pathao. But the drawback of this is that these are the only 7 organizations who have received the funding. We have around thousands, we said, and so uh, the VC from the government, the venture capital from the government, need to address those portion where small startups who are really affected by this pandemic get the opportunity to get some sort of funding or some sort of help to yeah, some sort of help in terms of funding. So that is one of the policy thing I assume, or I think we should always advocate, and the government should look into it. The another in terms of funding policy that was adopted by government was the Bangladesh Bank, the Central Bank of Bangladesh. They have formulated a 500 crore scheme for startups. And it is a collateral fee fund. It's a refinancing scheme, to be honest. So it's not a financing scheme, it's a refinancing scheme whereby if the banks provide funding to startups, then only they will refinance the bank at a lower interest rate of 1%, 2%. Now, to be honest, although this is a good measure, to be honest, but the reality must be assessed. How much is banks giving loans to startups, or soft loan to startups? Although we say it would be collateral free, but how much it is really? How are banks forefrontly trying to address this issue? The answer to this is probably no. For others, the international participants here, the Bangladesh banking sector is already having a tough time trying to address the 969 interest rate issue, and they are not funding the business activity. So currently, Bangladesh Bank, they are bound to give impose interest of 9% max. So that's something already is a concern, and banks are not giving out money. So how much would bank actually give out collateral fee money to startups? Is it really happening through banks? That is one of the policy issues we need to address. So this is in terms of funding that I wanted to discuss, that due to COVID, these fundings were made available. But the question we need to really ask, that has it reached the people it ought to reach? Has it reached the small startups who need that investment? So this is in terms of soft loans, but equity investments are there. Some sort of equity investments are still happening in Bangladesh. International funding as well as local investments are being given to some of the recognized startups. So we still don't have a pool to support the small startup. That is one of the issue I'm going to advocate in this session today, that we need policy driven activity to address concern of small startups, f commerces, and the gig economy workers. We need to address their concerns. The larger ones are important, because let's say a larger startup hires more than 1,000 people, that is important too. But the small 100 also employs 1,000 people, and funding activity should be done for them. So that is a policy decision in terms of funding that must be addressed. Um, and in terms of so that's funding, and in terms of uh, registration and business friendly environment, or the the ease of doing business issue that we have in our South Asia continent. This is where some we are also lacking behind. We are ranked quite poorly in ease of doing business. I again the same thing. There are policies which do it is trying to support the startup or the SME culture. For instance, I'd just like to refer to one of the circular that recently came out in February 2021. So that circular is regarding single process registration of company through RGSE. So that's a new thing. It could allow, so the company registration takes a bit of time, but this new single process application allows you to register within 72 hours online. Everything will be online, name clearance online. Then you put on your documents, submit everything, pay fees online, and get your registration done. The certificate will be emailed to you straight away. That's what the circular reads. But the question is, that hasn't happened yet. We have tried doing it. When we go to RGC and tell them, there is this circular which allows you to do it, the administrative side is still complex about that. We don't have the infrastructure in place. So there is a lacking between what is practically there in happening in on the field, and what the government has taken initiative as a policy, right? So those issues need to be addressed. For example, administrative action need to be addressed. Very simple things like, I spoke to one of the person recently who took our advice, who wants to obtain a trade license, but you can't obtain trade license before you're 18. But people are doing business in 14, 15 now. They are fantastic. They have better ideas than someone at his 40s. But he or she cannot obtain a trade license. So we need to address these policy issues through the a policy guideline. I'll just stick to this policy part for my last bit. That is, we do not have a startup policy, for good or bad. I think it's good, because that allows the startup to leverage activities, then be bounded by rules and regulation. However, we do need some guidance, maybe from the ICT division, to guide the startup sectors, and address the small issues which are barriers for us. Funding issues for small startups, licensing and registration issues for small startups. We can address them through the digital commerce policy. We do have a digital commerce policy. It has some very good policy suggestions there in terms of e-commerce, not the startup overall culture. But that's again the same thing. Implementation and enforcement is questionable. But if we can amend and nurture the commerce policy, that might help us for help these issues to be resolved. Yeah, so these are the main points from my end. I'll keep it till here, I think so, unless you have any question. Because if I go on, I'll go on like a class, thank you. So policy ways, I'll just sum up very, very, in short. Policy wise, I think the digital commerce policy need to be addressed, need to be amended or revised to address these very small, similar trade license like issues. I think funding sources for sourcing for small startups, SMEs must be addressed. The Bangladesh Startup Bangladesh or other VCs can address this. And in the policy-driven training activities for these affected startups or small businesses must be addressed. So that would be suggestion from my end. Right.
Thank
Hand
you
it
so
over
much,
to you,
Tanz.
Rafid.
Thank you, Tanzabhai, so much. I think you brought up some really good points. I just kind of, I think what my understanding is from the discussion that you made is that the government, of course, the pandemic has been going on for quite some time now. Of course, the government is learning. They're trying to develop policies and rules and regulation to kind of protect all sectors of the economy. But I think what's happening with the startups is that some of them are just falling through the cracks because they're doing it on a level which is not affecting all the startups equally. So I think that's one thing that needs to be addressed. Maybe much more specific policy directed towards startups who are probably not as able as the bigger and the older ones. That's one. And I think with number two, I agree with the point that you made that at the moment, at least from a lawyer or from an investor's point of view, we're kind of enjoying the freedom to play around with different company structures and the investment methods that we're working on. But then again, without guidance, it's a bit difficult because you always have to say that, for now it's fine, but you just don't know what's going to happen in the future. So I think that uncertainty is something that probably needs to be addressed in the short and in the longer run as well. So thank you, Tanzubhai, once again. I'll just hand it over to Manasbi now to kind of hear about the Nepalese point of view on the whole matter.
Thank you so much, Rafid, and thank you so much, Mr. Mozammel, for such insightful discussion on what policies or what uh, policies are needed to actually drive in the startups in our region. Because I think talking about the startup scenario and talking about how both the startups or entrepreneurs are behaving in terms of their desire to actually create something out of a small country like ours. I think they have the same amount of drive, both Nepal and Bangladesh, and I think that is one of the reasons that some policies and some guidelines are, I think both of the countries has equal level of flaws, and sometimes Bangladesh is much ahead on terms of guidelines. And I think when you talked about government being there at the start for delivery companies, I think there was a good thing, while Nepal had some issues prior to that. So I think I think it helps a lot of startups in Nepal also to see what kind of policies are actually important for them. And also having a youth population where, like, median age is 24.6 in our country, still the doing business is still very the trajectory that the level of amount that Nepalese can do, Nepalese business friendliness is very less. It's very difficult to establish to get established here in Nepal and get a very global remark, as to say. Plus, COVID brought a lot of difficulties. I had seen like many of my colleagues who had their own company, but now their company is no more because there was not much of support from either say banks or from their landlords, because the rent, taxes, and the other liabilities took a very toll on them, and they could not survive the first 6 months of the COVID itself. And still there are some businesses where who has a very difficult trajectory and who are really surviving on a very hard line. So I think it's very important for both of our country to understand what kind of problems are we facing, and what kind of support an entrepreneur or a thriving entrepreneur country needs from the government, from the policymakers, from the venture capital. And I think that's what drives in more people to actually establish their own company. So having said that, I would want to ask Mr. Adip Podal on his startup journey on because he's been leading two of the companies, and he's been he has established one of the very best e-learning platform in Nepal. And I think EKU Labs is one of the website where I ask my students to go and see for. So I think it's a very great platform to also further studies materials and everything for students. And also uh, I would want you to talk about the problems that you faced earlier, and what kind of what did you expect from the government, or if you had any expectations from your counterparts to help your business thrive during the COVID parts, and what kind of what kind of policies do you think would be better for your company on the on the future days ahead?
Thanks, Manasvi. Um, Actually, at Collabs, so when we started Collabs about 7 years ago, so um, the policy level for a startup back then is not back then was not so like there was no term as a startup here in Nepal. Like uh, we just restarted our company because we wanted to do something on our own. So um, we wanted to create an e-learning platform back then, and so when we went out for registration, so there was no any category where I could register my company as an educational technology company or uh, what it is, or any company that can teach online. So we had to register our company back then as a simple software company, and then we started working on education only. So we had a talk with some people in the government, some people in who were involved in making policies, but um, still there is no category. It's been 7 years and still we don't have any categorized description for a company that is working specifically on education and technology. So that was the problem that I faced. So when I still remember when I went for registration of our company and I told them about what we were going to do. So I was backed out by about 3 to 4 people saying that I cannot register such a company. Either I need to be a physical school or I need to have some place physical where I will be teaching students. So that is the policy. That was the policy, and that is still the policy for uh, companies like ours. And mm, so other problems are like so whenever we have these mm, tax VAT regulations, so we are not well aware about it. Like we are not taught in college about it, we are not taught in schools about it. And whenever someone wants to start a company, what happens is they just want to do their work. At first they just want to show that they exist in this community, and uh, in that hassle they sometimes skip those they does not actually even skip, they sometimes forget that they have to pay tax. They even don't know that they have to pay taxes on what are the topics for those taxes. And after about 3 4 years they face problems from the income revenue department, and mm, a very heavy fine is induced. Next problem that we face is like mm, in Nepal, so it's more in schools and colleges. It's more like they need to have a fixed syllabus, and more of the time is the spent lecturing students. And when we introduced our concept of e-learning, we told them that learning is possible online anytime anywhere, like wherever you are, that is not going to be a problem. But like people were very resistant to change, so we had contents from grade 8 to 12 in our website. And mm, in the initial phase, teachers they did not actually recommend our content to students, only because they thought that students, they might outsmart them and all. So that was a very challenging part for us as well. uh, Apart from that, finding an investor. So I started my company with about 100,000 rupees from my, I borrowed money from my dad. So, and what I was going to do, what we were going to create at Collapse, the money was not sufficient. So when we talk to investors about a long term investment, in Nepal, maybe it's a culture, because it's have been a tradition that we are traders by default. So from ancient times till now, and trading is the business where you buy something and then you sell something. You make there is a profit, certainty of profit, and most of the investors' mindsets are somewhat like that. So it's not that they are wrong, but there are very less investors who are willing to take that risk. Mm, Next is the community mindset. So whenever someone wants to start a company, whenever someone wants to mm, work on their own in our community. So recently these things have been changed, but still this mindset prevails. Parents want their children to have a secure life, and that is why they want a very secure system of, um, let's say, a government job for them, or a very secure place to work for them, even if it is a private company or private organization. And many, I have seen many of my friends, like they started a company, they failed in a small few projects, and then they started working for someone else, and they just give give up those ideas, who might have a very high potential in maybe, let's say, 4 or 5 years. So these things usually impact a lot of startups here in Nepal. And then the final thing is that people also, most of the people, they do not understand that time, talent, and treasure, these three things make up a company. So mm, time and talent are mostly ignored in front of treasure, in most of the cases of startup here in Nepal. Uh, and from the government side, so we had been lobbying with the education department of Nepal for about 6 years, for a memorandum of understanding, for a recognition that we are content providing companies for schools and colleges, but we were always unheard about. Like, we were always unheard. So recently, right after COVID, some things have changed, and last year during lockdown, I was called upon by the education department, and then we had an MOU. So it took 7 years for a company to be recognized by government. 7 years is a very very long time, and mm, mm, most companies who have something new in their ideas, like, I don't think they can wait for that long. So um, there are a lot of other companies like ours who are completely new for the government policies, but they have they have not been recognized legally as what type of companies they are. So yeah, that's it for now.
Uh, Thank you so much, Mr. Podil. And also, I think COVID actually helped you because since it was an e-learning platform, and
Yeah.
so how,
So
yeah.
COVID, what happened was, about the first month of lockdown, we had almost no works because the schools were already closed. They were like uh, students were not studying as well, so we didn't have much users. I was actually panicked because we make almost half of the revenue of our company from our website. And then so when we started lobbying for online education, we started talking to schools for we started making schools realize that online study is possible. And we also started getting calls from schools who were already interested in online education. So the first after the first month we were very busy. And the positive side was that our users in Nepal before lockdown, before COVID hit, we had only 20% of users from Nepal and 80% were from around the world. And that percentage increased from 20% to 40%. The users actually they increased 3 times. So we were serving about 100,000 users every month from Nepal, but that number changed from 100,000 to 300,000. So that was quite an achievement. Uh, but we were still since we are already on about 200 plus schools, and we have good revenue from that part as well. So after the schools were closed, we had no we our revenue dropped very significantly. And that was a great problem initially. But I feel good because it also created a chance for us for recognition. Maybe if there was no COVID-19, I think the government and the government body of education and our company would not have any kind of MOU till that, or any kind of understanding till that. So that was helpful as well. Um, we were usually we working from home became very difficult for us, as we all of us had this system of going to office and sitting and working there, and we were not usually working remote. We only had a few volunteers who remotely worked for us. So managing that had been a little bit of hassle, but we learned that as well with time. So it took us about 15-20 days, but we were able to manage that as well. The worst part was we had to cut off a few of our employees because of sudden drop in revenue. But since then a lot has changed, and we have been doing pretty good now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Podal. To sum up your explanation on everything, I think it took 7 years and COVID for government to actually recognize your organization. I think it was a good, right moment to act for you to sign, I think. And also, as you said, there are some problems like taxes. We had never thought about taxes, and I faced the same issues initially when I started my company. And also there was this problem with family not understanding what kind of thing that we want to do. So I think it's all cultural setting that we have that actually disrupt some of the youth's I think idea sometimes, and also their zeal to actually do some change and bring some differences in their own life by actually inventing something different and doing something different from what culture and society expects us to do. Also, now I'd like to go and ask Mr. Anjani on his company, on how Genesis Solution is actually creating impact all over South Asia, like because you have been working with Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and I think it's a very great it might be a very great place to know from you on how digitally advancing our startup can actually work for our reason, and how your company is impacting on these startups through your digital solutions.
Namaste, everyone. This is Anjani Fial, and really nice to be here. And thank you very much for having me on this platform as well. So first, I would like to briefly tell about my company. So I work for a company called Genes Solution. Genes Solution is a multinational company headquartered in UK, and we operate in different countries, including Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Australia, and India. As a company, we name ourselves as a digital transformation company, and we leverage the power of cloud computing to transform, be it startup, be it enterprise, into probably the next generation of business itself. So again, we are more on a service industry. So again, the startup definition is so blurred, and it's always so confusing to say which company is a startup, and especially in countries like South Asian countries where it's so jumbled up. Because I mean, if we compare Silicon Valley and probably Israel or UK and all the different ecosystem, then there's a clear definition, and there are like clear companies, incubator hubs, and accelerator labs where there's a defined startup companies. But in Nepal, if someone is developing website, is it a startup company? But then they ultimately develop a product, right? So it's the definition is so blurred and vague as well, between the SME and startup. But I think where I see as a company, we typically started as very frugal and startup nature. uh, Genes Solution started as a part-time gig for me when I was working full-time for a few multinational companies in UK. Started hiring with 4 people in a lovely city in Nepal called Pokhara. They were like probably first year students, undergraduate software engineering students. That's how we started, and now we are a team of almost 200 plus people globally at the moment. And recently, good news I would like to share as well. I think despite all of this COVID situation and bad news is, so as a company we got private equity investment just recently. We are yet to do a press release announcement from Old Bank IFC backed venture capital firm called Business Oxygen. Uh, so that was a good part. But if I have to, go back and explain the challenges that we have to go through to probably, get the company registered. So I'll briefly tell about the structure of how it is in different countries, and then we'll do a bit of comparison. So we are headquartered in UK. We got foreign direct investment in Bangladesh. And to be frank and honest, the Bangladesh experience was very, very nice. We were probably in a week time able to register the foreign direct and investment form over there. And then we were able to hire employee. Things were pretty smooth actually. I mean, not like UK where you can actually file a company name online, and in probably a day or 2 day you get everything sorted. It was a little bit more, but a week is I think probably a very sweet sport. But now coming to Nepal, that was like 2 years back. So we have something called foreign direct investment rule, where as a foreign company you need to go through a various series of process, and it took me 8 months to actually get a company registered here as a foreign direct investment company. And it was very lucky moment for me, because that time the limit of foreign direct investment was like roughly $50,000, which was, I mean, it's still a big amount for a startup company, but now compared to how it is now 500,000. So Nepal government has lifted the limit from 50,000 to 500,000. Now, if we think from the startup company perspective, probably, even in the Adip case as well, he might be looking for investment, but I don't think he might be looking for 500,000 at one go. Because if a company is willing to invest 100,000 or 200,000, or I don't know, like maybe even 300,000, I think he would be more than happily accepting that and expanding the business. So now, if you think from the government perspective, it's torturous policy, because none of the startups probably, if I have to count but 10, if I have to count like how many startups will be qualified with the new rule, I can probably count it in fingers. Probably less than 10 companies will be qualifying to go in that level. So this actually proves that the government policy is absolute rubbish, and it's not actually helping startup as well. They're looking for foreign direct investment, which is probably in millions or billions, like building the hydropower and I don't know what not, like maybe building a farm and those kind of things, which is still good priority area, but I don't see startup as a priority. Now, looking in the COVID scenario, again, my background, I primarily stay in UK from last around 12 years, but then probably spend my 40% of time traveling in South Asian countries, including Nepal, where I have my primary presence, Bangladesh, where I have my office as well in Dhaka, and then Pakistan, Lahore as well, and sometimes in Sri Lanka. So my experience is, working in UK, in the COVID situation, there was so much government support, not just for a startup, but for every company. For example, if I'm not able to pay salary to the employee, due to COVID reason. Initially, government, gave 100% of the amount reimbursement to me as a company, and then I pay the money to as a salary, which means I don't need to fire people. Like, Adit mentioned, unfortunately, he had to let go some of the good people as well. So that was a good way that, government was giving a private company relief to, keep their people. And I think the fund is going on. Like, I think initially it was 100% subsidy, then later they put 80%, now they're giving 70%, but it's almost 1.5 years and the fund is still continuing. So you can see, how the Western government is supporting, private companies, private sector. That's one point. And the other point is, there was like a loan scheme called, I think, Bounce Back Loan, BLL or something similar. So the part of the Bounce Back Loan was trading and qualifying companies easily get up to $50,000 loan on 0% interest. So there's no interest at all. And I think that's supposed to be paid. I exactly forget the years, but probably 5 or 10 years time, we take time to pay. That's like a free money, right, for a company. So I mean, if you think of, that's actually helping quite a lot for startup companies. Now jumping back to Bangladesh. Bangladesh compared to UK, again, not as great as, the government is not as generous. But again, one of our colleagues previously said about the Bangladesh startup ecosystem and how there's like some relief packages has been allocated. I would say, I mean, it's not sufficient, but it's still, I think, a very good and positive step. And I see Bangladesh government not in a critical way, but I think they're actually thinking that startup are going to be key, and they're actually trying to look after that. Now coming back to Nepal, I think Adit might be already laughing now. I mean, compared to even Bangladesh, we do not have anything. I don't think there is like any, the startup fund or COVID fund has been there. I mean, a lot of companies, for example, startup companies like e-commerce, who are running e-commerce, they are suffering so much now. And even like we have a lockdown now, and government is not recognizing those e-commerce, and they're actually putting restriction on home deliveries and such kind of things, which means it is clearly hampering their business. It's just not going anywhere at all. And the same situation applies to for example, I think we have a massive case with ride sharing application as well. Again, I think the positive side, like one of the colleagues earlier mentioned, a lot of Bangladeshi companies actually they're doing quite well in the startup side. Like one of the good example is Patao. Good friend from Patao, actually they expanded their business in Nepal, and they're doing quite well actually in the market. But the government policy side, it wasn't very clear, and hence companies like Patao, our local company like Tutel, they are like suffering so much. Again, I would not say that policies should be drafted probably in the initial phase itself. I don't think in any part of the world it ever happened, and I don't think it's actually going to be even possible to do that. For example, I'll just cite a example of Nepal itself. Nepal, we had a first vehicle when there was like no proper motor sorry, the road built at all. People were carrying the vehicle on their shoulder, and then they shifted the vehicle in Kathmandu, and then the road was built, and then the car started going. And the first licensing mechanism, driving licensing mechanism, started probably a couple of years after the car was there, right? So that's how I think historically it has been going. So I wouldn't focus too much on the policy, but I think what I would focus is the government mindset on this startup culture. Because if the government mindset is very wrong or not positive on this progression side of the policy, then that's where the problem creates. Because for example, eSewa, a fintech company started in Nepal. There was no fintech policy. Luckily, I think government embraced that quite well, and the fintech is going in a positive way. But for example, ride sharing application, the policy isn't taken in a positive way. Thus companies are suffering very much. And I mean, if the government nature goes in the same way, I highly doubt they would be running in probably a year or so. So I would say the government perspective should be really important on this side. And similarly on the I think we're talking much on the startup side. And again, I have to be a little bit frank and honest here. The startup term itself has been, highly, I think it is regarded in a very high way, and probably, it's highlighted probably than it is required. Because what's happening is, startup culture, the founder, the entrepreneur thing is taken as a celebrity. Because I have seen, startup founders who founded a startup 10 years back. I think they are on pretty much every event, every shows, and they're like, movie celebrity. but the business where they are running, how much impact you are creating, how many people you are employing is not actually counted. How much revenue you are making, or probably how much are you able to get an investment, are you able to, I don't know, like those things are not even accounted. So I think in the South Asian countries, I would say that celebrity mindset is probably ruining quite a lot of good brain as well. Because now what's happening, for example, Bangladesh, Buet is one of the very reputed university. We have Institute of Engineering in Kathmandu, which is one of the reputed university. So top ranking students, now they have been filled in their brain that engineers are job creators. You're not supposed to do the job. You should be building something nice, which is really good. But are we expecting all 200 people of engineering to be entrepreneurs? Then who is actually going to work for those entrepreneurs who run the company as well? I think this mindset should be positively changed and showcased such that entrepreneurs understand that there's a challenge, and not every entrepreneur is going to be successful as well. And the government policy side, not just on the startup side, where I would like to highlight the overall digital transformation of the nation. I think the digital transformation policies should be guided, and if the policy is clear, then that will actually increase or create the opportunity to solve a lot of problems. That's where probably the startup will come automatically in an organic way. What's currently happening is we are saying everyone need to do the startup, but where is the problem? Or if there's a problem, are we even in a state to solve the problem? Because Dhaka or Kathmandu is not just the city, we need to solve the problem. There are like so many, Sylhet is there, for example, in Bangladesh. We have like, Manang, Mustang, and, various places, which is very, very far, where probably there's no fundamental infrastructure like, electricity, like internet, probably like computing educations are not there at all. So what I would highlight and suggest for countries like us, where Bangladesh being probably 166 million population, I think, Nepal being around 30 plus million population, if the government policy is very aggressive on the digitization side, we do not need to grow like UK and USA were growing, like that took probably 15-20 years to go from this stage to this stage. I think we can leapfrog very quickly, probably investing on technologies like cloud computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, AR, VR, because that's where the demand is, and that's where it is solving a lot of problems. So if the rules around, for example, data residency, so we work with major companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft in all of the regions, and one of the fundamental problem of Bangladesh and same Nepal as well is same, because the government doesn't have a clear policy on data classification and the data residency issue as well. And they actually claim the data sovereignty thing, and they say that the data need to be in the country, which doesn't make sense in a lot of scenario, because Netflix wouldn't be Netflix if they were not leveraging the power of cloud, right? So Uber wouldn't be probably Uber if they were not leveraging the power of cloud. And Amazon itself is a big example of like a company started from the garage has now become $1 trillion company, probably world's one of the biggest company. If they were not leveraging the power of cloud computing, they wouldn't be actually here. Now the fundamental problem is, for example, I think one of the biggest fintech in Bangladesh, again from the I think legal perspective, I wouldn't take the name, but they had so much difficulty on leveraging the power of cloud. And finally, when they figure out a way to run the platform on a hybrid way in a cloud, so they have skyrocketed. And I think they are like number one, the e-wallet or, M-wallet for Bangladesh now. So, but then, they had to go through a lot of tweak around, what if they were easily able to access such platforms. So like companies like TransferWise, a lot of banks internationally, like Barclays Bank in UK, Standard Chartered Bank as well, which operates in UK, Nepal, and TransferWise, which is like Revolut Bank and Curve Card, and so many fintechs are there which are actually leveraging the power of the latest technology to grow from this point to this point in probably very short amount of time. Like Adib said, it doesn't need 7 years, and I think 7 years or probably 10 years is a long time for a startup to grow as well. So I think fundamentally, I would say, startup policies should be there, but I would say the digital policy overall, because nowadays, if the startup is not leveraging the power of digitization, then I don't think they will be able to reach where they want to reach. And probably I wouldn't even classify them as a startup if they are not as disruptive enough. Probably they will fall under the category of SME itself. So I would probably highlight, if it goes to the government level in any of the South Asian countries, countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, none of the public cloud providers are going to open the data center in a very, sooner time, right? So government should, negotiate with those providers, try to understand the requirements and make the latest technology accessible to the private companies, public sectors and startup companies. So it actually, drives the innovation, and hence a lot of, companies would be able to open startups themselves. We don't need to push, like, go and open the startup, because now they see the problem, they see the ease of opening the startup, and I would see it, thriving a lot as well. And another point on the startup side, so again, that's a South Asian mentality, probably. Again, you can be critical to me, but where I see is a lot of unfair competition. Like if Adip is opening like a e-learning platform, probably one of his friends is also opening the e-learning platform, and no difference in the business model. It's exactly going to be same. Probably even, if probably his employee is working, again, no offense directly, I wasn't like, taking as an example. So his employee could copy his literal code base as well and open another platform completely, right? So that's how it is happening in Nepal, in Bangladesh, Pakistan. It's exactly the same. Rather than that, what should be happening is it should be complementing. Like if someone is opening e-commerce, fair enough, there's a challenge on e-commerce, figure out like what is the challenge. Like, I live literally 12 kilometers away from capital city. I'm still in capital city, 12 kilometers from away from the city center or the main point, and I do not get the delivery here. If I have to get a COVID test now, government says, they can only charge 500 more rupees, but they are always saying like your place is very, very far. 12 kilometers from city, like, and they are charging like, 1,000, 2,000 just to come and take the, swab collection, right? So the complementing, what I mean is, there's a problem on logistics. So man, go and solve the logistic problem, right? So there's a, for example, on the health sector, there's a problem on swab collection. Try to build a mechanism, and I think the online doctors system is actually slowly building as well, which is a very good thing as well. Now on the problem side, I'll quite quickly do a few points. So I think for Nepal, specifically talking about what governments should do. So country with so much population, obviously building on technology will build a startup, that's for sure. But then it will actually build very talented people who can actually work for a startup to take it in a world-class level. Because honestly talking, the problem we are solving here, Western countries have already solved that problem probably 10 years back, or at least 5 years back, right? So now how can we be disruptor? Copying the same business model is okay, right? So that's okay in a local context, maybe, but you cannot go beyond Nepal or beyond Bangladesh. So to go in a national level or international level, you should actually be on par of those, top startup companies fighting with Silicon Valley's ideas or Israeli ideas or London ideas or something, or US ideas, right? That should be similar. So for that, I think government building the policy around digital transformation, making the tech accessible, which actually helps to build the technical talent in Nepal, which obviously can work in an international way. Because at the moment we are shipping people from Nepal or Bangladesh to Middle East or UK, US or other countries or Australia. Rather, we should be just like India. I think it's a very good example. We criticize India in a lot of ways, either in a positive way or negative way, but there's so much learning as well, because now India has so many this Silicon Valley companies, and one of the reason is because they are adopting technology so quickly, which means they have so much good tech brain, which even Western countries are actually leveraging as well. So I think I would highlight government should focus on technology building, collaborating with companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, such that we have awesome human resource which builds awesome startups, and then which actually can help in an international level itself. I think saying that, I would like to finish my talk, but if there's any question, I'm more than happy to take as well, either now or later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was literally a wonderful insight on, I think, South Asian. Every one of us were enjoying it. I can see every one of us smiling because it was so much insightful discussion. And I think your experience over the years has actually brought this topic over. And I think, yes, technology is the key to actually develop the startups in Nepal, Bangladesh, be it Pakistan as well. So with this, there are some questions for you, but I would like to deal in with them later on. I would like Rafi to take over so that Mr. Faisal can speak on his own. I think. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Nazmi. And I think it was absolutely correct. It was a brilliant discussion, and I think something which is quite relevant, and I think from a Bangladesh perspective, quite relatable as well. The points that Adib brought and the point that Mr. Field brought, that I think we have similar problems as well. In my entrepreneurship lecture that I do at NSU every semester, I like to call it the Uber problem. When we had Uber coming into Bangladesh for the first time, and we were like, "What to do with them? What are you?" And I think we slowly developed a policy to deal with companies such as Uber and Pathao, and then of course our startups, of course, like kind of leapfrogged, light years in those couple of years. But um, I think, like you said, similar problems in Bangladesh as well. And I think what Mr. Field said as well, I quite agree with that, to the extent that uh, there are laws and policies to be built, but probably we have to do it eventually. Maybe building them at once will probably kind of hinder the process that's in place. And the mindset is probably the change that we all need, and the fact that the government trying to accommodate the change and the expansion and the new ideas. So I think that's something that's very spot on. And also the issue that Mr. Phil said about you need to first find a problem and then find a solution. That should be kind of like the mantra for a startup. I think Mr. Faisal is probably in the right place to answer that issue, because their startup kind of deals with one of the very interesting problems that does not get a lot of media attention, but Mr. Faisal has been dealing with that kind of undercover on an underground level. And I would love to hear, and I think it's all of us would love to hear more about that. Faisal bhai, over to you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So first of all, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thanks to Mazel Tov for this amazing opportunity to all of us to share our point of view, what we face and how it should be changed over the period of time. So at the beginning, I'll miss the point. Just that's why I'll just connect with Tanzum Bhai's and Mr. Anjani's 2 points given my portfolio. So I run Safely, an affordable emergency medical service provider for the rural people. Given I work in the rural areas, so Mr. Anjani was communicating about the necessity of funding and other tech accessibility in the remote areas in countries like Bangladesh and Nepal. Given most of the money, funding, and everything is going on in Dhaka or in Kathmandu, but the other areas to be addressed as well, so that we can actually look at the problems we have and solve it from the core of our countries instead of looking for ideas from Silicon Valleys or some other countries. And on the other hand, Tanjung Bhai actually initially talked about, we are given chance to, our government actually gave us some money, some fundings during this COVID. It wasn't distributed properly, definitely. Tanjung Bhai actually criticized it. But then again, a couple of days ago, my co-founders and I was discussing about how government could actually depolarize the entire ecosystem instead of making Dhaka the center of startups. Yeah, they could actually provide fundings based on the development our country has already achieved. Let's say in the southern portion of our country has the more accessibility of internet than compared to the northern portion. Now, the southern portion of the countries could be actually given the opportunity of the fundings, let's say, and start something that could actually depolarize and improve the overall ecosystem and stretch it even further. And so what sort of problems do we face? Our company is 2 years old only. And we started as, we participated in a competition, and that's how it's an international competition, and we participated, and the idea and the development started from there. It happened in 2019, and we didn't have any company registration or anything back then. So in 2020, we started our ideas full time, and all of a sudden, this COVID-19, this pandemic happened. And what happened afterwards? So we had an opportunity to raise funds from Australia. We already received the funds recently, but just think about it. The confirmation of fundings was in April 2020. We recently got the chance to receive the fund. Why that happened? Because we couldn't, I mean, our company registration process and everything actually was closed. During the initial lockdown, everything was closed. Not even any online process or any automated systems. Referred by I actually worked with referred by and asked for suggestions during that time because what could we do? I mean, we didn't have any options to register our companies. And it continued for a couple of months. And in September last year, we registered the company in Bangladesh. And now comes the bank account. Just think about it. Our parent company is in Singapore. I haven't traveled to Singapore, right? In last 1.5 years, I worked with my external stakeholders around the world. And without going abroad, I brought money from Australia to Singapore to Bangladesh. Now, in the entire process, it never delayed, it got delayed. Okay, the initial signings and everything happened with FedEx and other. It's easy now. Okay, and even the signing is very easy. But when I bring the money from Singapore to Bangladesh, again, the system is like, okay, recently we're hearing that the RJS is closed, so I cannot be given the encashment certificate and I cannot utilize the money. I have my money in my bank account, but I cannot use it. Why? Because of the recent lockdown, the RJS is closed. I mean, just think about it. We are, I know I mean, given the situation from the, if you compare, we're well ahead from Nepal's situation overall. But just think about it, how discouraging it could be, and it is for foreign investors who actually invest in companies like ours, and I cannot utilize that amount. It is a problem, and everything is automated in abroad, I know, and we need more startups in Bangladesh as well. But in terms of the policy level, for the registration and the simple stuffs needs to be taken care of by automatic systems. It cannot be monitored by individuals again and again. Because of the efficiency level. Just think about it for a founder like me or my co-founders. We are giving so much of thought on our product development, and given we provide healthcare services to the individuals, our entire minds always is in the quality of the services that we provide. On the other hand, my mind is also working on whether I'm getting my funds or not. Okay, whether I'll be able to pay my employees or not. So this is one of the problems that I believe that should be addressed.
Just to interject for a single moment there, the point that you raise, I think the problems and the hassles relating to RJC is I think everyone has an idea about that in Bangladesh. For our audience all over the world, RJC is the organization. It's our joint stock of companies. They're the one who governs all the companies in Bangladesh. Do you think, let's say, if they had, for example, a separate organization under them, maybe just dealing with startups, and like you said, with the requisite digitalization and the fact that that can operate without the requirements of physical presence, without the administrative hassles that RJC has to offer, do you think that would probably help deal with the issues that startups are facing in relation to RJC?
Definitely. Just think about Singapore. Like, we register without traveling, right? So the registration process happened from a third-party companies like the one you just proposed. So we work with, I mean, we had tons of options, to be honest. I mean, there are many companies working to register the company, only to register the company on behalf of us in Singapore. And we had the options, and we chose them from the best option. But then again, definitely it could actually increase the efficiency and help us working with RJC and other legal aspects. And the second point that I want to address here is the problem in access to information. So in a country like us, where most of the government-related communication and statistics data collection is still manual and not automated. And this is why, if you look at the government statistics bureau, data sheet, more or less we get the data from last couple of years, not even in the recent years. And we cannot take decisions from the data that we get from these sort of websites. Because just think about it, how fast our country has been growing in last 2-3 years. Insane. All of a sudden, we have lots of startups, and the economic development in Bangladesh is also admirable. But on the other hand, if you look at the accessibility of information for a company like us who works in the rural areas, the data and access to information is still manual. We cannot, we have to take permission from the local government authority just to look at the data sheet. I'm talking about paper, okay? It's not the website where I look for the data. So I don't even know the number of patients or the number of pregnancies are happening in last month or in a year, let's say in one of the upazila or one of the areas in Bangladesh. There are websites already. To be honest, there are some of the things that already happened, but the problem is it's not updated, okay? So why it's not updated? Because everything is yet to be fixed, yet to be automated. And for just to encourage most of the startups, like just think about it in this COVID-19 situation, we cannot move. So when we cannot move, it's the only way to access to data is online, and where you see that the data and everything is more or less scattered a couple of years back, okay? And you cannot communicate with the customers on a daily basis apart from visiting them upfront. And our third, my third discussion point would be attacks. So given this is mostly for Bangladeshi startups right now, I would say, because since we have a boom in our startup ecosystem, now all of a sudden our companies are participating in national and international competitions, and all of a sudden we are getting recognized by global organizations. And some of, I mean, even last year and in last 2 years, there are 7 startups participated in Y Combinator from Bangladesh. How amazing is that? But now think about it. I mean, this is investment. But on the other hand, we also the global ecosystem has changed a lot over the period of time. So not only, for-profit companies are getting grants as well, okay? There was a time when it was frowned upon, like for-profit, why a for-profit company would take grants. Now the for-profit companies are accepting grants, and the only way to bring that money in is as a revenue. Now it's an open secret. Everyone knows that big companies also accept grants from foreign stakeholders. We also have taken accepted grants, but we brought the money to Singapore because Singapore doesn't have any problem allowing their companies accepting grants. So from Singapore to Singapore to Bangladesh, but we could actually bring the money directly to Bangladesh. And if we bring the money directly to Bangladesh, we have to give 10% of upfront tax cut down. Just now, I understand from government's perspective, and it should be, they should actually take 10% of taxes from us. But I would suggest at least there should be a policy for 1 or 2 years of, after the registration, at least 1 or 2 years of, we need to survive at the beginning, right? So it's very discouraging taking 10% of direct money from the grant that we receive after weeks of hard work or years of hard work, and we work with our external stakeholders continuously. So this is another problem that we face, and I believe should be addressed. And the last topic of discussion from my point would be COVID-19 itself. So when we look at the global perspective, I know this Indian subcontinent is far behind from Western culture and everything. But one of the major areas where this subcontinent should look for is the healthcare ecosystem, especially in a country like Bangladesh and Nepal, where I see, like, even in Bangladesh, this is small countries have 168 million people living in this area. So healthcare is an issue that needs to be solved. I mean, it's a constant process. Now, I believe that government should give more attention here. It's I'm not only about focusing on telemedicine, but also in other aspect of fundings should be there just to increase uh, more participation in healthcare startups. Why? Because to serve 168 million people, okay, we cannot expect these peoples to be served by the government itself, because end of the day our government alone cannot help them. I serve a company who works with the local government hospitals, and I know how difficult it can be for the rural people. So we need more startups in this segment. And also I believe, and I think there should be more VC firms working in targeting directly towards healthcare ecosystem, because once we work in different segment of the health ecosystem, it will grow and help everyone. I was talking with one of my, one of the founders in US, in the US, and we had this discussion where they have everything now. They have a device that could actually allow themselves to know about an individual who was walking down the road, let's say, and had a problem for his diabetes, let's say. They get the data and they send it to the nearest hospitals and everything. It's fancy. It's unimaginable for us. Okay, but we need to do that as well, at least to try. Okay, for the healthcare, we do not need tech innovation. We just need to follow the Western community. That's it. We just need to bring those ideas here. So I believe government should address this as well. More or less everything is around my understandings and my knowledge. So if any of you want to add anything here, I'd love to hear and learn more.
Thank you, Faisal bhai. I think you kind of hammered the nail. I think the points that you raise are quite understandable, quite practical as well. The one about fund transfer and everything. I would ask, request Rifat bhai to address that matter at a later phase. In terms of law and policy, what we can do in terms of the investment law or the money coming in. And also a couple of issues that you mentioned, the one about digitization and automation. I think a lot of them has been addressed by Mr. Fio. I think he said that how the cloud process and the digitalization of the startups can help in those regards. So I think those are changes that needs to be implemented sooner than later. I'll now request Ms. Anisa Ali to talk about what she has been doing, what is SBK Tech Ventures doing recently, and also to touch upon a couple of the issues raised by the startups. Over to you, Anisa.
Thank you, Rafi. So Rafi has introduced me. So SBK Tech is basically a woman-led technology-focused venture capital company. Our fund strategy is to drive impact investment, general lens investing, ESG investing, as well as sustainable development goals. We started investing in 2017 in Bangladesh and currently manage, in addition to our own startups, we manage the other startups from OBX Data Limited and have 38 startups in our portfolio. We are currently investing in education tech, health tech, agri-tech, fintech, and service tech startups to basically promote digitalization, which has been talked about, and insurance scalability. So we've talked about the Bangladesh venture capital scene quite a bit. Everyone has made a few comments on it, but on a positive note, in 2020 and 2021, even though it has been COVID year, different startups have raised funds locally and internationally, including one of our own portfolio startups, Brava. Other startups which have raised money are ShopUp, Pulse, etc. This is always a good sign because local as well as international financial institutions therefore are now going to come forward even more to invest in startups. I know Rifat Bhai was going to talk about the policy, so I'm just going to briefly go over the fact that the BSEC is also working on amending a few rules. I know the alternative investment rule says pension funds can invest in it. The Bangladesh Bank has given guidelines that banks should invest in funds and therefore get a refinancing scheme. But as mentioned before, this is still not being done because banks are generally not investing yet. Hopefully it will change soon, but it's not It's not been done yet. Um, the major hurdle in basically, I'm assuming it's Nepal as well as Bangladesh, is the fundraising. It is just simply difficult. And that is not just for startups, it's also for VCs because investors are reluctant to just invest in startups. As a result, newly licensed venture funds are not being able to collect funds, and therefore, if they're not being able to collect funds, they're not being able to disburse funds to the startups as well. This is basically because of the fear and lack of awareness regarding the venture capital ecosystem. I think this has also been discussed based on the fact that our culture itself is not, it's, our culture itself is not just ready to disburse money to venture capital funds. It just seems very nascent. Yes, our government is prioritizing the venture capital ecosystem. Bangladesh startup has started, but it is not reflected in all levels of policy planning. Um, it's been discussed. Adib has said it. Mr. Creel has said it as well. Our entrepreneurs simply struggle in getting trade licenses, intellectual property rights, and other licenses and permits to business. Foreign investors are basically reluctant to invest in a business which does not have all the legal documents, which has recently been mentioned by Faisal Bhai. Moreover, their foreign investors are also not confident about the hassle-free exit of their investment. They are not 100% sure whether the profits can be repatriated, etc. And because of this, funds such, regional hubs such as Singapore, China, etc., which have huge funds to invest, are not being able to do so in all startups. For example, the accelerator program, again, a positive note, four of our startups were part of the Accelerating Asia recent cohort, but even Accelerating Asia, which invests in Bangladeshi startups, require that the startup has a Singapore holding company. So for them, it is also, they're going to only invest in those companies which have a Singapore holding company or an outside holding company, simply because they are afraid to invest here because of the exit strategy. In order to in order to get them to invest in our companies, we need to build a positive image by creating examples of seamless transactions of foreign investment. Yes, ShopUp did get it. So did Chaldal, so did Sheba. A lot of companies have received funding, so has Prava. But most of these startups are actually have holding companies not based in Bangladesh. Yes, they do have, I'm not saying all of them, like I know Sheba is a local hold company, but other companies do have holding companies in Singapore or other islands or wherever, so that at least the repatriation of profits, the exit strategies, etc., is easier. Honestly speaking, and I know Rifat Bhai might be able to say this better than I do, the policies which are currently there may require changes, may require tweaks so that our investees basically receive investment from outside. Um, to summarize, we're at a nascent stage, but it is developing. I'm not going to say the Bangladesh venture capital market is not developing. It is developing and it is developing quite fast actually. And with more transactions awareness, the venture capital ecosystem hopefully will flourish in the country over the next decade or so. Rashid had actually mentioned that I'm to talk about the different milestones that basically we as investors look at. So I'm just going to briefly go through them before anyone has any questions. So as an investor, basically, we look at how risk is being managed in all stages of investment. For example, minimization of risk is a key factor for us while not losing an opportunity to invest in a company. It's basically a balance game so that investors either try to find the least risky point to invest at a company relative to what we can afford to invest or the valuation. That is basically what all startups look at. So for us, it is basically if the risk is very high, we would like the valuation to be lower. And this is generally right before the completion of a key milestone. If the valuation is low, we're going to invest. Obviously, if the risk is high, the valuation is going to be low because we are going to try to de-risk our investment as much as possible. So that the best time for a startup, according to us, is to either raise funds right before the completion of a key milestone or right after the completion of a key milestone, but not before too much time passes. This is basically, I'll give an example of it. If an investor basically, or if we feel that the company is on track to hit its milestone, and we know that the company hopefully will succeed and become much more valuable to the outside market, the investor wants to get into it on the deal right before the launch, for example, if it is a product launch or if it's a service launch, for example, so that we can get into the company at a lower valuation while the company is still riskier, but not overly so. On the other hand, if we decide to invest after a key milestone is being completed, we're basically stalling to ensure that we're de-risking fully. This might be based on the fact that if the company has completed a certain product launch or has hit the number of users, etc. This is when we know that the valuation is going to be slightly high because a company has achieved a milestone that we were looking at it, but we will also want to invest really quickly because if the company has achieved the milestone, we also know that other investors will want to get in at the same time because it is more attractive to them. The basic rule of thumb that we look at is basically human resources. We generally look at the fact that the founders, the management team, etc., are basically giving full time to the organization. It's not just like, oh, the founder is sitting and coming to work, let's say once a month, and the management is hiring it. I mean, doing the entire work. We generally don't like that philosophy because if you don't have skin in the game, like we say, the company might not scale. Yes, you might succeed, but the scalability factor might not always be there. Um, the product or the service is always important. For example, a milestone that we always look at is product launches, version releases, etc. Market validation is, of course, important because first customers, first paying customers, what your traction is, etc. And another thing, not all of us look at, but we do look at it if it's possible, is funding. Maybe that some money is being committed to a round that, for example, we are going to put in or lead for if it's a $500,000 round. And if you even have a $50,000 commitment, it is always easier for the lead investor or any other investor to go in. Um, I have mentioned this before, prove that you can work together as a team using historical evidence. It is an important milestone that we do look at. A working prototype, first users and clients. Prove that you can basically talk to investors. Every financing round, even the smallest ones, for example, BDT 25 lakh, is going to have proof to us or help us go and speak because we can simply say, yes, you can talk to investors. Yes, you can talk to audiences because you have more than 100,000 users or 1 million users or whatever number of users that you have. Proof that the initial team or your founder or sponsors are able to attract talent. This is very important to us because if you start off a company, let's say you start off with 4 people. Sure. When you're going to scale, you will need a CEO level. You will need C-level, you need CTO, CEO, CXO, etc. You'll need VP level professionals. So if there's a proof that your initial team is able to hire and attract talent, it is very important to us. But this is the milestone we look at because people basically are the building block for your scalability. You can start off really small and in 5 years you can grow exponentially simply because your people are great and founders are always important. They're as important as the product or service for us as investors. We always look at it. There is another thing that we do look at is that the proof that the ecosystem agrees with your idea. Bangladesh itself, even though we have a mass market, 168 million population is amazing. If my ecosystem doesn't really agree with the idea that you have, yes, we look at it, but we say if you can pivot to a lower level and then put this in your second stage. For example, let's say 10 years ago, telemedicine, if we were investing in telemedicine at that time, we would have said, why don't we start off with something smaller? Like, for example, or not telemedicine. I'm just saying this as an example. Let's say 20 years ago, maybe telemedicine would not have been like the ecosystem or the market would not have agreed to it. Right now, telemedicine is something that we do agree to simply because it is agreed by the entire market. if you're too far ahead of your time or if you're too far behind of time, both the things, your ecosystem basically has to agree to it. Otherwise, you will not be able to scale. And for us, scalability as an investor is something we will always look at. As investors, we do want exits, even if it's like 10 years later, we do want exits. So scalability for all investors are basically just that. Um, the other thing we look at is that proof that there is a market. Obviously, I mean, we have a 168 million population. Great. We do have market for almost everything. But if it's too niche, then if the market is not at least, let's say, $1 million annually in 2, 3 years or 2 years, then invest or getting proof for your investment is very difficult. So we won't really necessarily do it. Um, and obviously, of course, like I said, proof that you can scale. In 5 years, your revenue figures have to be able to hit the right standard for us to invest. And that for us is going to be an obtainable market. The target market and the addressable market are great, but if there is no obtainable market, generally we might not try to invest. Or if we do, it will be a very small amount so that we can see how it goes and then look in further. Rafid, was there anything else you wanted me to touch on?
No, thank you, Anissa. Thank you very much. Actually, I'm glad that you brought up the milestones because I was about to raise a question on that, and you kind of harped on it at the right moment. Because one of the issues that we want to talk about today is sustainable development goals, and I think it's best if it comes from an investor's point of view, so that the startups that we have Faisal and Adib, and they would know, what are the things that an investor is looking for, when they're investing. So I think that was thank you, Anissa. Thank you for that. And I'm glad that you addressed the issue about the fund transfer and bringing in funds and those things. Those are very important. The point about accelerating Asia and about them wanting a holding structure based in Singapore. That's one of the problems that we have been having when we're trying to raise capitals for the startups, and I'm sure the startups would know about this a bit better than we do. That's kind of a problem that we're trying to solve. Now, in order to address all these issues, I'll probably request Rifat Bhai. He probably has the most difficult task to kind of now address these problems from a law and policy point of view, and how some of them can be addressed with the help of correct laws and timely regulations and guidance. So over to you, Rifat Bhai, and thank you, Anissa.
All right. Thank you, Rafid and Manasvi, and also Mezatov for this wonderful discussion with all my respected co-panelists. So I was actually enjoying the last 1.5 hours, I would say. It just went in a flash. I didn't realize that it was 1.5 hours already, and we have had so many discussions and pointers all throughout the session. So since we have been talking about policies and laws and the problems, I want to go through a different side. I want to speak about a different side of the story, because a lawyer not necessarily always talks about law. They can say something else as well sometimes. So just this entire startup scenario, it's can be compared to a plant. Now, think about a plant. Now, before the plant, this startup, whenever a startup comes up, these startups do often do comes up to address a problem. Think about Uber, think about Airbnb. So they were all first initiated because there were problems with people getting transport, and to minimize the traffic hours they spent on the street. For Airbnb, they were first introduced to address the problems of accommodation. And all of these startups do come in place where there is a problem. So startups are actually the problem solving companies or entities which gives a solution to a society and boosts the society to a better tomorrow. Now, thinking about a plant, or taking my personal example, taking my practical experience, I actually bought a plant for my balcony. And on that plant, I experimented by adding few different chemicals and few different fertilizers. Now, sadly, one of the plants that I had reacted to potassium because I added way too much potassium than I was actually supposed to add. Now, that plant backfired and it died instantly. But what I learned from that is I was using the right amount of potassium for all the other plants that I had in my balcony. and all the other plants are giving me the fruit properly right now. Now all these startups are exactly like that plant. So they come in, and all these government entities and corporations are like the fertilizers. They add value to the plant, and only then, with the support of all these fertilizers and right amount of chemicals, this plant can start giving the fruits. And within a year time, you can't even keep count of the fruits that these plants are going to give you, or the trees that they're going to give you. Now, speaking of this, some plans will fail, some startups will fail, but from the entire process that I developed, I created a standard operating procedure for the plans that I buy now. So I first do my standard procedure, and then I go ahead with the other additional top-ups, which varies from plans to plans. Now, for startups in Bangladesh, or even in general, as I have learned from my colleagues in Nepal, we do not have a standard operating procedures for any of these startups as of yet. So we go more of a ban and try approach. The ban and try approach is more like, whenever there is an innovation, we first ban it. We say that, okay, we don't have any laws for it, meaning this is illegal, and let's see how we can regulate it right now. And we spent a lot of time just trying to figure out that how this technology or how this innovation is going to affect the society. And by this time, the energy and zeal the founders have, that dies within. And as a result, the startup is bound to fail, since the standard operating procedure is absolutely missing. Now, the thing is, yeah, exactly. So the thing is about the automation of the processes which Faisal has identified. I personally would like to agree to that, because the automation of the process will actually simplify and minimize the number of different agencies obtaining services from these government agencies from a one-stop service. Now, in Bangladesh, of course, the one-stop service has been recently introduced, and Bangladesh is trying to give all the government services through a single window, to minimize the time and the delay and the difficulties involved in starting a business to actually getting it running. But this is still, although it has been recently introduced, and the one-stop service by the Bangladesh Investment Development Authority has been in effect, but we just cannot say as of yet that how good would it be for the startups right at this point. Now, this another way we can solve the problems underlying within the absence of appropriate policies or standard operating procedures for these companies would be to innovate our entire ICT-led delivery service models by the government agencies. Now, these government agencies, instead of actually going ahead and banning, or going ahead and taking time to figure out what exactly the laws are required, they can establish a risk-based approval process and inspection system, how these companies or these innovations are first allowed and then allowed to grow, and then so that it speeds up the entire service delivery processes. Now, about the laws that are in effect right now, you already know that our Companies Act, in particular in Bangladesh, dates back to 1994. So this, of course, this law itself does not address the technological innovations that are being introduced or being brought either by the people in Bangladesh or being taken from the companies already successful abroad. Now think about Tesla. Tesla already creates the battery-enabled cars. Now, Companies Act in Bangladesh and the Customs Act, none of them recognizes the battery operated cars in Bangladesh. And as a result, if this was coming to Bangladesh, then the first thing would have been, okay, you cannot you cannot run in the streets, go and stay in the corner until we figure out what exactly you are. So these are the problems which requires, of course, a major, the government agencies have to keep on accommodating these innovative business activities, take on more evidence from the policy talks that we are all holding. Now we can just sit on Zoom and be live on Facebook and talk about policies hours and hours and hours. But if the right amount of people, if the right people do not address the ideas and thoughts that are coming from all these startups who are already suffering, and if they are not holding a stakeholder discussion, not just taking the minutes of the meeting from the stakeholder discussion, but actually coming up with a solution to what the problems these stakeholders are facing, there wouldn't be any changes, at least in the next several years, for startups in the South Asian scenario. So these are the things that, of course, are the key and vital requirements that the government has to introduce. They have to regulate the impact that these startups bring to the society, be it a positive impact, be it an impact which promotes the government services that they are already providing. But they first have to try it. So uh, accommodating the laws, amending the laws that are already in place. Year-old laws has to be completely abolished. It has to be thrown away. New laws should be introduced, and also it's very easy to say that new laws should be introduced. But we all know, at least from the lawyer's perspective, I know that it's years of hard work before a law actually comes in place. But you can't help it, Rafid, because if you don't move with the pace these innovations are happening, if you don't move with the pace that the changes are happening, you will always have the fear to you will always have the fear of staying behind of what your other competing countries are doing. So countries of these South Asian countries do have a wide opportunity to learn from these Western countries. I would specifically point out, so that they the sooner we start adopting what uh, other tested countries are doing, the better our own country will do and accommodate space to the startups and to solve the problems than these startups are planning to, or at least achieving for the last several years or for the last few years in Bangladesh and in all the South Asian countries. Uh, Thank you very much, Rafid. Unless there are any other questions.
Thank you, Rifat bhai. I think that's quite interesting. I really liked your idea about your example with the tree, and it can't be more relevant. And the point that you made, I think you're absolutely right. Government, from where they're sitting, they need to sit with, us, maybe with startups, with investors. They need to know what's wrong with the system so they can take steps to correct it. Which is actually one of the main driving reasons for the webinar today, is to kind of create that discourse and dialogue where we know probably in some time in the future we can have more substantial proposal for the government, like these are things that we have compiled from people, from players within the ecosystem, that maybe you can address or correct from your position. I think the government needs to listen. And kind of going back to the original discussion, is that maybe not laws and policies that are required to be changed right now, but it's the mindset of the government that needs to be more accommodating. So I'm first of all, I'd like to apologize on behalf of Mazeltov for running a bit late, but I think it was just a very very entertaining conversation. I think everyone was quite invested in it. And we're going to wrap it up shortly. We just have quite a lot of questions from the audience, but we can't take all of them in at the moment. I'll just ask one, which is directed towards Anisa. It's a question from one of our audiences, actually from one of our global advisors, Shafkat. He asked, do companies in Bangladesh tend to function more cautiously in terms of being austere in where return of investment is concerned? I'll just copy paste the question for your convenience. This is one of the questions that was asked by Shafkat.
Yes, he's already sent me that. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes, he already sent me the direct message. But yes, they do. They are cautious, but it is changing. Yes, it is changing slowly, but they are cautious because when they want an investment, generally people, I mean, investors here who even wrote smaller checks would look at return of investment in a very short period of time. So therefore people, Bangladesh companies were very cautious, but that is changing. And yes, it's changing slowly, but it is changing.
Thank you. Manasvi?
Okay, I was on mute, sorry. So yes, we have one final question directed to Mr. Anjani Fail. from one of our founders actually. So she asks how, as a foreigner, his experience in working with startups in countries like Pakistan and India different from Nepal and Bangladesh. So I'm going to copy the question here. Let's see. Yes. So how, as a foreigner, is your experience in working with startups in countries like Pakistan and India different from Nepal and Bangladesh?
Okay, so again, the question can be interpreted in multiple ways, but it is directed like me being a foreigner going to Bangladesh, Pakistan, and different countries. Um, I think mostly the entrepreneur circle is more like from an educated background, like people might have done undergrad or postgraduate, being in a technical sector or probably in the finance or management side. So what I believe is, even though like our skin, maybe tone and language and all those things, our culture is different, religion is different, but I think the same language, being an entrepreneur, we speak seems to be same. I think the pain, I think we again are from different countries. I think we were referring to the same pain and then same policy challenges. So I think when we meet those entrepreneurs, I think I feel very connected in be it in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, and especially because most of the startup companies are backed with tech background as well. And again, when it comes with tech, usually we deal with CTOs or CXOs, primarily on the tech side, and I think it's again a common language. So being a foreigner, I do not see any distinction. Again, my experience in Bangladesh was so nice. There's so many startups who had like so good ambitious, and then they were like thinking in so much deeply into the problem as well. I think that was very good experience. Similar in Pakistan as well. And now if I take the question on the other side from the government perspective as
Yeah.
well, I think Bangladesh is not much different, probably treated very nicely. Pakistan, that was my very first experience going to Pakistan. Again, a foreigner going to Pakistan, there seems to be have a different protocol of, how can a foreigner interact with the public entity and stuff. Again, my experience, how it looks like outside of how Pakistan is so different. It's so good and so nice over there. People are so friendly. And as well as, I was given, I think it was their protocol, security people, they gave special protection as well when I went to one of the university named Sargoda University and did a public session. I think that was more for foreigner safety perspective, but I think the government approach is quite good as well. So my experience on most of the South Asian countries is really nice.
Thank you so much. Actually, this is what Rufra was actually trying to ask on the regulation point of view and how things were there when you entered into Pakistan. So I think your answer summed it up. I would ask Rafid to ask one final question for the day. Yeah, Rafid.
Yeah, thank you. This is a question directed to one of the lawyers, but I'll kind of put it across for Tanzum Bhai. The question is, do you think that the legal framework is too archaic and needs an overall change to address the mushrooming of startups? It's from the audience. I'll just copy paste it for you in the chat box. If you could, Tanzuma,
Thanks.
address that question from a policy point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we the discussion we had today, we do have enough policies, rules, regulation. It's developing in Bangladesh from the startups, incorporation, registration perspective, or from the funding perspective. So I wouldn't say that it needs to change much. I would say that the culture need to improve. That's one way of addressing our concerns. But mushrooming of startup is not a bad thing, or SMEs, I would say, it's not a bad thing. We need to address the pain point, as Anjani Bhai was saying, that the pain points must be addressed. The SDGs must be addressed. So mushrooming is not the problem. We need a mindset, I think. I just wanted to add one small point, raised by Anishapa, that the foreign overseas investment has an issue for Bangladeshi startups. You cannot set up it's regulated activity to set up foreign companies abroad. And there is a policy currently in draft, the Overseas Investment Policy 2021, developed by BIDA. And I wanted to raise this because there's an important issue for startups, that startups needs to invest or set up holding company in foreign countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, or other islands. but there is restriction in Bangladesh. You cannot repatriate or you cannot send funds abroad. The overseas investment policy do address this issue. It allows companies to set up holding companies in other countries. However, there is some restrictions. For instance, you need 5 years of experience, a large amount of paid up capital, etc., which doesn't help our startups. So for me, because the discussion is law and policy, I'm going to stick to that. And this is something the startup, all of us, lawyers, businesses, VC firms who are there, this is something we need to focus on, and maybe submit a representation to BIDA or Bangladesh Bank, and deal with this address. Otherwise, setting up a holding company is quite difficult for Bangladesh startups. This is something immediately we can give attention to. Yeah, thanks, Rita.
Um, thank you, Tanzan Bhai. So thank you to the panelists once again for being a part of this initiative, and I hope you found this webinar as exciting as I did, and I hope you found it as informative and helpful to an extent. And hopefully this is the first of the series. We have a year-long plan. Hopefully we can have you back in one of those webinars, and I'm sure we can learn more things from you, and the audience all over the world can learn more from you. I'll just hand it over to Manasbi to kind of conclude the session for today, and thank you once again from my side.
Thank you so much, Rafi. Thank you so much to all the panelists. It was actually very insightful series. We had not hoped that it would be so much it would come with so much of experiences, and it would come with so much of learnings. And actually, I think there are so many facts that we understood, and it was a pleasure to have all of you here today for the first ever series on the talk series on the startup webinar, which we hope to continue for the further sessions also. Thank you so much. With that note, we would like to end our session for today.